so polarized on so many things, right? And marriage and relationships is one of the big ones that people are getting polarized on. And what I've seen recently is this trend where women want to have their own house and their own money and their own things, and they want a guy who makes six figures, but they want to work, or they want it's a complete shift from a traditional family substance. Like they want. And have you heard of this guy Kevin Samuels?
Yeah.
We have.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, I just learned about him. Okay. So
wow.
yeah. So he's not in my circle of. I hadn't heard a lot.
Yeah.
Somebody was like, that guy died a couple. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I just saw him on YouTube or whatever. You know. And so I watched some of these conversations that he's having with young, mostly African American women, where he's like asking them questions like, rate yourself. Do you want to work if you if you're to get married? Do you want to have a job? And how much do you want your man to make? And all this stuff. And then he comes back at them and says, well, do you know the average African American man only makes $45,000 a year? Do you know that, and he just shares facts with, and they're like, well, he's like, well, do you have any kids? And they're like, yeah, I have 2 kids. Well, he's like, do you know it's exponentially harder for you to find a man of that quality that you're looking for if you have kids from other relationships, and all these different things get brought up. And I was like, I've never thought about it. and it was so. And so if you guys have seen some of that, do you agree with some of that philosophy? I mean, not everything Kevin Samuels.
Yeah, of course,
he's not a Christian guy, or and he hears a lot of curse words and all that stuff.
He claims to be, but yeah.
And so, but it was the first time I had heard some of that thought. That listen, women, like, slow down, think about what you want and how.
No, there's merit there. Yeah, there's merit there, and a lot of women get upset about how he talks to women, but like,
he wasn't very nice.
He's a man. He's a man.
He was very direct.
He's going to be direct with you, and you're calling his show. He made that very clear. You're calling his show. There's no reason for him to coddle and sugarcoat stuff, right? These are things that men want. This is like your situation. This is what you're coming up against. These are the facts. Like, there's nothing that he's not trying to come against you. This just the life that you have before you, right? And so I agree with a lot of things that he said.
It was like, not only did I agree with some, it's the first time I'd ever heard some of these thoughts. And to me, it was like he's talking to, and this happened many times, so I can use this as sort of a generality, right? He'd be like, well, how do you rank yourself on like a scale of like 1 to 10, and 10's like Beyonce or whatever, and like everybody's like, I'm an 8, I'm a 9, and they're like, he's like, well, how much do you weigh? And he's like, well, your BMI is actually obese or whatever. And you really think that you're still, and he would just like say these things back to them to like try to get them to recognize that maybe their scale, the worldly scale, in God's scale, you can be Beyonce to whoever you're going to marry, you know what I'm saying? But is different than maybe you're projecting yourself when you look in the mirror. And I watched woman after woman, at least that was on his show, have this thought that like, no, you're wrong. Like, I am Beyonce. I deserve a man who makes $2 million, even though the average man doesn't make nearly that. And if he does,
maybe in their whole life.
And the thing is, like, doctors don't make that much, and you want a guy, you want to wait till you're 30 because you want to have your cake and eat it too. You want to live a life where you're going to party and hang out and do all this, and then you want to meet a guy who's a doctor and will buy you the big house when you're 30 years old. And they're all like, yeah, that's what I want.
No.
And he's like, that's never coming, honey. And never. And I was like, it's never coming? I know it wasn't coming. I was like, because if I would have just heard them without his sort of questions to them, I'd have thought, well, that's reasonable. They want to have their own job. They want to have a life before their husband shows up. But then you start putting the facts on the table. Wait a second. Maybe y'all need to rethink what you're doing.
Exactly.
Statistics are interesting like that. When you hear them for the first time, you hear a stat and it's like, wait, how many people only what percent of men make, not just black men, not just Asian, white, across the board. I think it's less than 10% in this country make over 6 figures. Every woman. It seems on the internet wants, so 100% of the women fighting for 10% of the men. And then he gets into, and you guys don't want to share them, but you want all of them. And it's like, not that I'm pushing for that, but it's interesting to see those comments come back where it's like you're pushing against the numbers. It's not even like he's expressing anything that's like he just made it up. He's like, I'm giving you the numbers based on what you say you want. This is your probability. And they'll still say, hey, I'm gonna play the lottery on this one. It's like, and
that's what it felt like to me. It felt like a lot of women had a lottery mindset in terms of the men that they were wanting to be their spouse. And I think that when we look at biblical marriage, God, nowhere in the Bible does it describe wait for Boaz.
Yep.
There is a story of Ruth and Boaz.
Yep.
There is one story where you can say, hey, look, she was poor. He waited and he showed up and he moved mountains to get her. You know what I'm saying?
But she brought value.
He went through a lot.
Yeah.
To get that woman.
Yeah, he went through a lot, and there was a whole thing, in Jerusalem rules, and there had to be you had to be part of the family. There was a whole thing, but ultimately, the Bible is not specific on the type. It describes what a virtuous woman is, right? And a virtuous woman is not described as someone who waits until they're 30 and they've had kids with other people to find the spouse that they meet. The world has a different definition of what marriage should look like than what a virtuous, biblical, submissive marriage looks like, and it's
divorce rates are high.
Preach that word, would you?
Divorce rates are too
People
high.
are looking for happiness.
Yeah.
And to do what they want in the marriage.
Yeah. The funny thing about divorce statistics that I learned is that most people will say, how many percentage of people get divorced? 50%. Like on average, people will say, like half of marriages end in divorce. But it's not entirely true if you look at the statistics, because the amount of people that get divorced gets exponentially bigger. So let's say you've got, out of 100% of Americans, first people, like your first marriages,
first one,
35% of those are ending in divorce. If you get married twice, now we're talking you're 60% likely to get divorced.
Wow.
You have a third marriage, you're like 75% or higher, and you have almost a 90% chance of getting divorced if you are married for the fourth time. And so those divorces that are happening the second time, the third time, the fourth time, the fifth time they're lumped in with the people who are getting married for the first time. And so everybody's like, their marriage doesn't work. No, it doesn't work for some. They keep doing it over and over and over and over and over again. And they're like, the problem must not be me.
Well, and to add to that, our generation get divorced a lot too, because
or don't get married.
Right. So that's lumped in there too, I feel like.